Welcome back. For the rest of our videos, we'll be focusing on Building 7. In part 13 of my respectful rebuttal of Richard Gage's 9/11 video, Blueprint for Truth, we're summarizing the 2008 NIST report on the collapse of Building 7. Richard and I hammered out a brief summary together prior to our March 6, 2011 debate, and a few small changes were added before this video was made. This is similar to a stipulation in a courtroom where both sides agree to certain facts in advance so they don't have to waste time fighting about it in a courtroom. Here we both stipulated to what NIST said regarding the collapse of Building 7 on 9/11 so everyone could better understand what we've been debating about. I told Richard that in our debate I didn't want to just parrot the official story of Building 7 as presented by NIST, but to advocate for some kind of natural collapse scenario. Since NIST did not really analyze the details of the collapses themselves, there really isn't an official story after the collapse begins anyway. I've also found out that there are some minor differences of opinion among some scientists and scientific organizations about exactly what happened in Building 7 behind that perimeter wall. The consensus I've found among scientific people who are dissenters is that they agree 95 to 97 or 99% with NIST, and then they hypothesize a few details about the collapse itself and propose a few variations on the NIST collapse initiation theory. There is some controversy around my use of the term natural collapse. Richard Gage found it an acceptable moniker for what I was advocating, but several people independently have said that it makes it sound so, well, natural. Well, there's nothing natural, obviously, about jet planes crashing into steel frame buildings, and we all agree that the buildings were destroyed, me by planes and fires, and Richard believing it's by controlled demolition. So the term natural collapse is a generic term I came up with because I believe that after those planes crashed and those fires started, the destruction of the three buildings was the natural consequence of the destructive forces at work, according to the generally understood laws of physics. Plus, I don't want the moniker of defender of the official story to limit my research or, frankly, to turn my audience off completely. Richard Gage agrees that this is a good summary of NIST's position, but of course he disagrees with the NIST report itself. We'll talk about that soon. Here is a summary of the official story of Building 7. Richard and I created this together just so we would have that platform to continue our debate. When NIST issued its final report on Building 7 in 2008, they asserted that there are both differences and similarities between the collapses of Building 7 and those of the two towers. Some important differences: no plane hit Building 7. The towers suffered major structural damage from the plane crash. Building 7 had very little structural damage from the debris hitting it. NIST also said, quote, "The collapse of World Trade Center 7 is the first known instance of a tall building brought down primarily by uncontrolled fires. The towers burned for under 2 hours each before going down. Building 7 got hit with burning debris at 10:28 a.m. and collapsed at 5:20 p.m., about 7 hours of fires there in various parts of the building." Column 79 helps support the east penthouse of the building. Building 7 had a large, open atrium in the lobby and was held up by columns and 3 complex truss systems. One truss system held up part of the atrium area. The other 2 were in the northwest and the northeast parts of the core area. Here's how the truss structure in column 79 looked. And here is a photo of column 79 and the nearby structure. So now I'll paraphrase the NIST report so we know what they claim. That fire was the main reason for the collapse, along with lack of water to fight the fire. Fires burned all afternoon. Shortly after noon, there were fires at the southwest corners of 19th, 22nd, 29th, and 30th floors. Separate fires in World Trade Center 7 broke out on different floors, most notably on floors 7 to 9 and 11 to 13. Firefighters reported large gashes and fires in the south face of Building 7, but NIST says there was not much structural damage. Building 7 collapsed because heat expanded the floor beams and girders, and their unusual length magnified that effect. Also, connections between structural elements that could not resist the heated loads, and a structure not designed to prevent fire-induced progressive collapse. The north perimeter showed fires on only a few floors, but NIST claims the fires initiated on the side which was hit with burning debris. A girder on floor 13 lost its connection to a critical column, column 79, which provided support for the long floor spans on the east side of the building. The displaced girder caused floor 13 to collapse. Floor failures cascaded to the 5th floor. This collapse weakened column 79 over 9 stories. Column 79 then buckled and trickled triggered an upward progression of floor system failures that reached the building's east penthouse. Failure first occurred all the way to the roof line, involving all three interior columns on the easternmost side of the building, 79, 80, and 81. Then all of the columns east to west failed in the core of the building, 58 through 78, that reached the building's east penthouse. And finally, the entire building above the buckled column region then moved downward. That series of structural failures was mostly invisible, with the east penthouse as seen as collapsing first, then around 7 seconds of nothing really visible on the north face. This is the video NIST used to determine the rate of collapse of the north perimeter wall, Building 7. As evidence of the complete collapse of the penthouse and the structure during those 7 seconds, NIST shows this picture of light shining through the windows right after the east penthouse disappeared from view. Important to the controlled demolition theory advocated by Richard Gage is NIST's statement that the building's exterior facade fell slowly at first in stage 1 of this diagram, then in stage 2 at gravitational acceleration, according to NIST, for 2.25 seconds through a distance of approximately 8 stories, 32 meters or 105 feet, then slower than gravitational acceleration again during stage 3 of the collapse. NIST did one computer simulation of what an explosive demolition would have looked like. They say it would have caused many more broken windows, much louder sounds, and a different pattern of destruction. This is an explosive scenario, but it is not a simulation of what a thermate burning of the columns might have looked like. There are several scientists now who have proposed variations on the NIST theory for Building 7. Arthur Scheuermann and Ryan Mackey both focus on the long span beams expanding, sagging, and then contracting when the fire moved away. The Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat, the University of Edinburgh, the Arab, and others have issued their own scientific criticisms of some details of the NIST report. Richard Gage considers the idea that the failure of a single column could bring about the global collapse of a 47-story steel frame building preposterous. In our debate, he also made the incredible claim that, quote, NIST fabricated a new phenomenon of thermal expansion, close quote. Now, he's also said this in speeches before, and in making this claim, he's denying an extremely obvious fact. That fact is that steel expands when it is heated. Even his fellow 9/11 controlled demolition researchers disagree with him on this. They at least acknowledge that thermal expansion happens, but they still ask how can thermal expansion cause total collapse of a tall steel frame building when it has never happened before. He also asserts that fires did not engulf Building 7 nearly as completely as the fires that attacked other buildings, which stood up. Most importantly in his mind, he asks how can a building collapse at free fall acceleration through the path of greatest resistance for even 2 seconds? And he challenges the NIST computer models and asserts that they are impossible and even fraudulent. We'll look at these critiques in more detail in the upcoming videos. Just a few comments for right now. Modern computer simulations are way better than the tests that were available to people in the 1960s or even in the 1990s. In fact, these simulations were oftentimes being developed just to make it possible for NIST to do their research on the collapse of these 3 buildings. We're just getting good enough to begin to account for all the many variables in a large building collapse, especially when the collapse begins behind a standing facade and the mechanism of the collapse is therefore almost invisible. The NIST final report of 2008 is one of 6 natural collapse theories for Building 7 I have found. 3 others have variations on NIST theories, so I don't take the specifics of NIST as gospel. Behavior of long struts and fires is relatively new. These long struts are designed to allow for maximum open space to rent and for visual attractiveness in places like the atrium. Some scientists say NIST may not be taking into account the possibilities that after the struts expand, then they sag, as NIST says, but then when they cool and the fire moves on, it gets frozen into its sagged shape, but then it shrinks again as it cools, pulling in the exterior supports even more. David Scott, chair of the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat, responded directly to 9/11 activist accusations of fraud by NIST by writing, quote, "The Council does not cast doubt on what you call NIST's thermal expansion fairy tale. We believe that the failure was caused by thermal expansion, but perhaps the critical point of time was as the expanded beam returns back to its original position. This is part of the thermal expansion theory." So while he and others question the exact collapse sequence, They have not rejected the NIST findings outright. NIST now advises against unsupported long strut building design in the future, and their recommendations have been taken up by the International Code Council and the National Fire Protection Association. Richard completely disagrees with NIST conclusions, to the point where in our March 6, 2011 debate, I asked him if he also opposes the building and fire safety recommendations that NIST has released into their World Trade Center reports. He said yes, he does, that they are a waste of billions of dollars. I told him that really scares me, and that my life and the life of everyone in this room is worth the extra cost of creating safer buildings in the future. In part 14, we will look just how badly the fires were and whether the collapse was symmetrical. Not surprisingly, Richard Gage and I disagree on these issues too. Thanks for watching.